Section 12.4 is about the presidency of James Buchanan. He's going to serve one term as well from 1857 to 1861. He will be our first unmarried president. So he'd never been married before he joins the presidency. He is committed to states' rights and territorial expansion. In the election of 1856, the Democrats will put up James Buchanan, who endorses the Kansas-Nebraska Act. He wants to enforce the fugitive slave law. He stresses that Congress should not interfere with slavery and it should be allowed to be left up to the states. And he's going to go up against the Republican John C. Fremont. And so this is the first time the Republicans have put up a candidate. Fremont is going to endorse the Transcontinental Railroad, and he's going to say that the Missouri Compromise, if it is repealed, that is a bad thing. And there is this discussion on what to do with the Missouri Compromise. With popular sovereignty, is the Missouri Compromise going to remain a thing? So that is up for discussion as well. In the Panic of 1857, James Buchanan, once he's elected, this is the first thing that he has to deal with. The economy is growing very, very rapidly. Triggered by the failure of the Ohio Life Insurance and Trust Company in August of 1857. The North is hit the hardest. Buchanan and Congress refused to help anyone, saying that it is not the government's responsibility to help anyone in need when it comes to finances. The South is delighted that the North is suffering so much, and go as far as a couple congressmen suggest that if the North is having so much problems, they should just enslave the poor, and that would help their situation as a whole. This is going to anger a lot of people. And then shortly after this, we have what is going to be called the Dred Scott case. It's Dred Scott versus Eliza Sanford. Dred Scott was born a slave in Virginia. In 1830, he was sold to an army surgeon in St. Louis. He's going to be moved into St. Louis for that time. Shortly after he arrives in St. Louis, he is going to move with this army surgeon into Illinois and then into the Wisconsin Territory, where Dred Scott will be allowed to marry a woman named Harriet. In 1842, after 12 years of living in this free territory in the Northwest Ordinance, they will be returned to St. Louis. A couple of years later, the owner is going to travel to New Orleans, leave Dred Scott in St. Louis, but the sergeant is going to go to New Orleans. He's going to marry Eliza Sanford, and then he is going to die, which transfers the ownership from the army surgeon into Eliza Sanford's ownership, even though they are in St. Louis and she is in the South. Eliza Sanford then moves from the South into the New England area. So she's moving into a free area. Dred Scott is going to sue for his freedom, stating that since he spent time in Illinois and Wisconsin all that time, and those were free territories, that he should be free. The first decision comes from the Missouri State Court, which rules in his favor and says, yes, if he was in this territory for 12 years, and all the time he spent in St. Louis on his own with his family, that he should be free. Eliza Sanford is going to go for a repeal, and she's going to go to the Missouri State Supreme Court, who reverses the decision and says, though St. Louis is in a slave state, therefore he remains a slave, and it is up to Eliza Sanford to decide if he would be free or not. Now, Eliza Sanford wanted Dred Scott and his family to remain slaves because any money that they earned while working in St. Louis, because the sheriff's office would allow Dred Scott to just basically live as a free man, even though he was considered to be a slave. Any money that Dred Scott received from these jobs that he would have, part of that money was to go to Eliza Sanford. And so she didn't want to lose that income. And so Dred Scott then, after a couple more years, is going to appeal up to the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, it takes them a little bit before they come back with a ruling, but at the beginning of James Buchanan's presidency, within a couple months of his inauguration, the Dred Scott decision comes out. James Buchanan knows that this is going to happen, so he knows what's going to happen with the Missouri Compromise. He knows what's going to happen in regards to individuals who are slaves within the state, the country of the United States. And so he's not really worried about them. The ruling comes down as this. The suit was dismissed for lack of jurisdiction. Basically, the Supreme Court said that persons of African descent cannot be, nor were ever intended to be, citizens under the U.S. Constitution at that time. The property clause that is in the Constitution is only applicable to lands possessed at the time of its ratification in 1787, and therefore does any decisions made in regards to property since that time would go against the Constitution. So therefore, the Missouri Compromise is unconstitutional because the Constitution established that we were a country of slaves. That we had slavery in our country. So the Missouri Compromise line, unconstitutional. And that Congress cannot ban slavery in any of the territories. But it also established through the Supreme Court that it is up to each state to decide what it wants to be, if it wants to have slavery or not. So that is up to a state decision, because there's nothing in the Constitution specifically that says hardly anything about slavery. Just that, so the addition would be that the Supreme Court says it's up to the states to decide. And with popular sovereignty and everything, they allowed that to happen. So now, with the Dred Scott decision, the end of the Missouri Compromise line, now remember, under the last section, we talked about bleeding Kansas. So now we have more aggression in Kansas. We have the Lecompton Constitution. So you have your two sides. You have the Free Soilers who are set up in Topeka, Kansas. And now you have your pro-slavery element in Lecompton. So the Lecompton Constitution in 1857, pro-slavery legislature orders a convention, and they're going to write their own constitution. Now, the anti-slavery individuals boycott this constitutional convention, which allows the Constitution to easily be approved because there's not enough people there to say no. And so it's approved, and it is sent off to the Senate for approval. Voters in Kansas are going to reject the Lecompton Constitution. But Buchanan urges the House of Representatives to accept it anyway. It's going to be blocked in the Senate by Stephen Douglas, and it's going to be sent back to Kansas. Now, those in Kansas already know that they voted it down. So the new governing body that is established in Kansas orders a brand new vote. Lecompton again is rejected. But Buchanan again supports the pro-slavery element and wants it pushed through. Congress then says enough is enough. We're going to settle this once and for all. So the U.S. Congress holds its own new vote in regards to the Lecompton Constitution. And it again was rejected. Wholeheartedly, majority rejected. So in saying so, Congress then accepts that Kansas will come in as a free state, which is going to cause a lot of problems. One of the things that's going to come through all of this is the Lincoln-Douglas debates. So as you can see, Abraham Lincoln versus Stephen Douglas. It's 7 debates that's going to happen between August 21st and October 15th in 1858. It's basically a campaign for the Illinois Senate seat. Because remember, in the beginning, the House of Representatives chose who our senators were. It will change in the Constitution with a constitutional amendment later, but at this moment, the House is still choosing who the Senate is. So this is running to see who will be put forth to the House for them to choose from. Stephen Douglas is running for re-election. He is rich. He came from a very wealthy family and has been involved in national politics for quite some time. Abraham Lincoln, lawyer, well-spoken. He comes from a very poor background, And although Lincoln is going to win more of the popular votes, the Democrats control the House of Representatives at that time, so they're going to choose Stephen Douglas. They're kind of afraid of what Lincoln would do if he is chosen for a leadership position. It leads to a lot of changing in thought patterns. More people are going to sign up to be Republicans, and this will help in 2 years when Lincoln runs for the presidency. There will be a political change as well. By 1859, more states have entered the Union as free states. So there's this huge upset. Slaveholders are no longer in control of Congress. The South becomes the minority for the very first time. And that's going to cause a lot of problems. It does lead to the largest brawl on the House of Representatives floor. The South begins to talk of secession once again, and even threaten that if Lincoln is elected, if he is chosen as the president, that they would secede. Now, a lot of situations going to happen in that 2 years between the Lincoln-Douglas debates and the beginning of the Civil War. The election of Lincoln. What is going to happen? So there's a lot of political shift. There's a lot of military shift. And one of the things that's going to happen is it happens at Harper's Ferry. Let me just scooch me out of the way so you can see. So Harper's Ferry, John Brown, in October 16th, 1859, John Brown was convinced he was carrying out a divine mission, a divine plan to help with that of ending slavery. He was a moral absolutionist. He had a disdain for compromise. You remember that all or nothing personality that he has. And his hope is to use the rifles and pikes that are captured at the Harper's Ferry Arsenal, which is in Virginia, and then spread out and free slaves as they go. He took 20 men to Virginia, and he hoped that the surrounding slaves in the surrounding area and the poor would rise up with him and help support him. He's going to send out men to kidnap slave owners. 11 in total will be kidnapped. However, no slaves rose up. By dawn, the arsenal is surrounded by the U.S. Marine Corps, led by Robert E. Lee. They were there for about 32 hours before Robert E. Lee decides enough is enough, and so he orders the Marines to storm the building, which they do, and they kind of beat John Brown into unconsciousness, because John Brown was not coming willingly. He had a sword in his hand, and he was willing to take people out. 10 men in all were killed, 5 were captured, including John Brown, and 5 then will escape. In the aftermath of all this, we have where they're going to search the surrounding area, surrounding country for fugitives who had participated in the attack. John Brown was taken to the courthouse in nearby Charleston for trial. He was found guilty of treason, and he was sentenced to hang, which they immediately went forth and did. John Brown was the first white man to use violence in an attempt to end slavery, that amount of violence. This very much scared the South at that time. Southern state militias began training for defense against further raids. The North will label him a martyr, where the South labels him a murderer. But we have the situation over the next year and a half of, what are we going to do? Is this going to lead to war? Is this not going to lead to war? So there is this, uneasy tension that is everywhere. But we will talk about that in the next section, in section 13.